They carved her name from monuments. They smashed her statues into dust. The Roman Senate wanted her erased from history forever, but what they tried to bury was too horrifying to stay hidden. For 7 years, inside the most powerful palace on earth, an empress turned human beings into inventory, dignity into profit, and noble families into her personal property. This isn't a legend. This isn't propaganda from political enemies. This is documented fact from official Roman records that survived 2,000 years, because even those who witnessed it knew the world needed to remember what absolute power can become. What you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about ancient Rome. Because behind the marble columns and golden eagles, behind the philosophy and the law, there was a machine running on human suffering, and the woman who built it was the most dangerous person in the empire. Her name was Valeria Messalina, and this is the true story they never taught you in school. Imagine this moment. The year is 45 AD. You wake up in your Roman villa as the wife of a respected senator. Sunlight streams through silk curtains. Servants prepare your morning bath with rose petals and imported oils. Your husband left early for the Senate forum where he'll debate agricultural policy. Your children are with their Greek tutors, studying Homer and mathematics. You're planning tonight's dinner party, deciding between roasted peacock or stuffed dormouse, selecting the finest Falernian wine from your cellars. Your life is comfortable, prestigious, secure. You are untouchable in Roman society, protected by your husband's rank, your family's ancient bloodline, your spotless reputation built over decades. Then you hear the knock, not the gentle tap of a household servant, not a friendly neighbor arriving for morning gossip. This is the hard, authoritative pound of imperial power announcing itself. When you open the heavy wooden door, 6 guards in ceremonial armor stand waiting, their faces carved from stone, their hands resting on sword hilts. Behind them, an imperial secretary holds a wooden tablet bearing the purple wax seal you've learned to recognize, the mark that means this message comes directly from the palace, directly from her. They haven't come to arrest your husband. They haven't come because anyone has committed a crime. They've come because Empress Valeria Messalina has personally selected you for imperial service. And in the next few hours, everything you are will be systematically destroyed. Your marriage will become a hollow shell of shame and silence. Your children will inherit a stain that follows them for generations. Your name, which once opened doors throughout Rome, will become something your family whispers with downcast eyes. You will become a number in palace records, an asset in an inventory system, entertainment for men who pay premium prices specifically because you used to matter. This actually happened, not to one woman but to hundreds, not in secret but with full documentation, schedules, revenue reports, and medical examinations. And the woman orchestrating it all ruled beside the Emperor of Rome, controlling the largest empire humanity had ever known, for 7 years without consequences. Valeria Messalina. Even today, 2 millennia later, her name carries weight in historical scholarship. Traditional histories remember her as the young, beautiful third wife of Emperor Claudius, a woman who gave him a male heir, and helped stabilize the empire after the insane chaos of Caligula's assassination. Marble statues depicted her as the embodiment of Roman motherhood and virtue. Official state ceremonies celebrated her as the perfect imperial consort. Propaganda portrayed her as a devoted wife, a caring mother, a blessing to Rome. But those statues, the Senate ordered them destroyed. Her name, chiseled from every inscription, her image, melted down from every coin. This is what Romans called damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory, the ultimate punishment reserved for those whose crimes were so unspeakable that even their existence needed to be erased from history. What were those crimes? What could possibly warrant this level of official erasure? The answer is documented in sources that survived the destruction, records hidden in archives, accounts written by historians who lived through these events and couldn't stay silent even though speaking truth meant risking their own lives. What they described was something so methodically evil, so industrially organized, so psychologically devastating that even Roman historians, men who lived in a civilization where owning human beings as property was completely normal, where watching people die for entertainment was a regular afternoon activity, even they struggled to write it down without expressing genuine horror. Messalina didn't just have affairs or indulge personal desires. She constructed a systematic apparatus of sexual exploitation that operated like a sophisticated business enterprise, complete with bureaucratic departments, financial accounting, performance metrics, and long-term strategic planning. This was industrial-scale psychological warfare disguised as imperial privilege, and it ran for nearly a decade from the very heart of Roman power. Every detail I'm about to share comes from authenticated historical sources, official court records preserved in the Vatican secret archives, detailed eyewitness accounts from historians like Tacitus and Pliny the Elder, who had access to imperial documents and interviewed survivors, archaeological evidence excavated from the Palatine Palace, showing architectural modifications that only make sense when you understand what activities they facilitated, financial records tracking revenue and expenses, correspondence between officials discussing operational procedures using coded language they thought would protect them. This isn't speculation. This isn't exaggeration. This is documented historical fact, uncomfortable and disturbing as it is to confront. And here's the element that makes this episode particularly chilling. Messalina didn't target random people from the lower classes who lacked power to resist. She specifically, deliberately, systematically selected wives and daughters from Rome's most powerful families, patricians whose bloodlines traced back to the founding of the Republic, women who should have been absolutely untouchable. She transformed sexual humiliation into a precision weapon of political control. She maintained detailed files on hundreds of families. She established operational schedules that ran like clockwork. She calculated profit margins and tracked return on investment. The entire operation functioned like a modern corporation, except the product being bought and sold was human dignity. The deeper I researched this historical episode, the harder it became to process. The scale of it, the audacity of it, the sheer calculated cruelty of it. This wasn't passionate crime or impulsive violence. This was cold, methodical, bureaucratic dehumanization. Before we go further into this journey through one of history's darkest chapters, I need to ask something. If you value educational content that explores authentic history without sanitization, please hit that subscribe button. This kind of research takes weeks of reading primary sources, consulting with historians, and verifying every claim against multiple documents. Your subscription directly supports more content like this. And leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. It genuinely helps this channel reach others who want to understand real history in all its complexity, beautiful and terrible. Now, let's examine exactly what Messalina built, and how she nearly broke the Roman Empire from within. Understanding what Messalina actually constructed requires moving past simple moral outrage into examining the systematic mechanisms she employed, because the sophistication of her operation is what made it so devastatingly effective. When I first encountered the primary source documents describing her network, I literally needed to step away from my desk and process what I was reading, because the organizational complexity was almost more disturbing than the crimes themselves. Messalina converted entire sections of the imperial palace, the architectural symbol of Roman authority itself, the building that housed the government of 60 million people across 3 continents, into a forced prostitution network. But this wasn't crude or haphazard. This wasn't some chaotic situation spiraling out of control. This was methodically planned and precisely executed. Her targets were specific: senators' wives, consuls' daughters, women from patrician families whose ancestors had fought in the Punic Wars, who claimed descent from Rome's legendary founders. the most elite bloodlines in the empire, and she made participation sound like a patriotic honor rather than a crime being committed against them. Picture your existence as a Roman noblewoman in this era. You've spent your entire adult life cultivating an impeccable reputation. You manage vast household estates with dozens of slaves. You support your husband's political career by hosting influential dinner parties where alliances form and deals close. You educate your children to embody traditional Roman virtues. Your name means something. Your word carries weight. People respect you not because of fear, but because you've earned it through decades of dignified behavior. Then Messalina's representatives arrive at your door carrying what palace documents literally called recruitment lists. These weren't random selections or impulsive choices. They arrived armed with comprehensive intelligence files compiled over months of surveillance and investigation. What information did these files contain? Which families currently owed political favors to the imperial household that could be leveraged? Whose husbands needed government appointments or military commissions to advance their careers? Which women possessed specific physical attributes that matched particular client requests? They evaluated women like commercial inventory, maintaining detailed dossiers that included precise physical descriptions, family connection maps, psychological assessments predicting compliance likelihood, notes about potential resistance factors, and how to overcome them. The bureaucratic infrastructure supporting this operation reveals its calculated nature. Messalina employed dedicated schedulers who coordinated appointments and managed logistics, client preference managers who matched specific requests with appropriate candidates, medical staff who conducted examinations and maintained health records, accountants who tracked revenue streams, calculated profit margins, and prepared financial reports, security personnel who ensured silence and prevented escapes, administrative scribes who documented everything in meticulous detail. They treated human beings as inventory items in a luxury catalog, complete with classification systems, quality ratings, and pricing tiers. Here's the process that unfolded when you received selection notification. First, Messalina's representatives framed everything as a special honor directly from the Empress herself. This wasn't exploitation, they explained. This was service to the empire. Your family's loyalty to Rome was being tested. Your participation demonstrated patriotism and devotion to imperial stability. You should feel honored by the Empress's personal attention to your family. Then came the implicit threats, never stated directly but absolutely clear. Refusing would constitute an unpatriotic act. It could be interpreted as disloyalty to the imperial household. Your husband's senatorial career might suffer unexpected setbacks. Government contracts your family businesses depended on might not get renewed. Your son's applications to military officer positions might face inexplicable delays. Your daughter's marriage prospects could be damaged by whispers about your family's reliability. Nothing overt, nothing you could appeal or challenge. Just a suffocating pressure that made resistance feel impossible. Most women complied. What choice did they have? Roman law gave them virtually no independent power. Their husbands controlled everything, and their husbands couldn't afford to oppose the Empress without risking complete destruction. Once inside the palace compound, they systematically stripped away everything defining your identity as a person. No use of real names, only numerical designations or degrading nicknames assigned by administrators. No discussion of family connections or previous social status. No mention of your children, your husband, your life before. No acknowledgement of your humanity or dignity as a Roman citizen. You became what administrative documents literally termed imperial assets, property of the state, available for deployment according to operational requirements. The physical spaces where this occurred were architecturally designed for the purpose. Archaeological excavations of the Palatine Palace have revealed modified room structures with specific features. hidden entrance passages that allowed women to enter without being seen by regular palace staff, small holding chambers where multiple women waited between client appointments, larger rooms with viewing platforms for spectators, secure storage for the detailed records they maintained on every transaction. The clientele represented a cross-section of Roman power, senators seeking favorable committee assignments, wealthy merchants wanting lucrative government contracts, foreign ambassadors conducting diplomatic negotiations and demonstrating their importance by accessing what ordinary men couldn't, military commanders requesting prestigious legion commands, provincial governors visiting the capital and expecting luxury treatment. And critically, many clients specifically paid premium prices because they were accessing a senator's wife or a consul's daughter. The humiliation of Rome's elite families was part of the attraction, part of what made the experience valuable to them. It was a demonstration of how completely power could dominate even the highest social classes. When you could sleep with your political rival's wife under imperial arrangement, you'd been shown exactly where you stood in Rome's hierarchy. The psychological devastation these women endured defies adequate description. Try to imagine the cognitive dissonance. On Tuesday morning, you're hosting a literary salon discussing Virgil's poetry with Rome's most educated women. By Tuesday evening, you're stripped of identity and forced into degrading servitude. The human mind isn't designed to process that kind of radical status change. Many women described feeling like they'd left their bodies, like they were watching everything happen to someone else, because accepting it was happening to them would break their sanity completely. The trauma compounded over time. First encounter, second, 10th. You stop counting, you stop thinking. You become precisely what they want you to become, a thing without thoughts or feelings, because maintaining your sense of self while this is happening hurts too much to endure. But Messalina's operation expanded beyond even this systematic exploitation. She transformed forced prostitution into public entertainment, because private degradation wasn't enough for her. She needed audiences. She needed spectacle. She organized formal competitions where noblewomen had to compete directly against professional prostitutes in endurance contests, with spectators watching from specially constructed viewing platforms, placing bets on outcomes like they were watching chariot races at the Circus Maximus. The most infamous example that shocked even jaded Roman society. Messalina herself challenged Scylla, Rome's most renowned professional prostitute, to see who could accommodate more men within a 24-hour period. This wasn't rumor or exaggeration. This is documented by Pliny the Elder, a Roman author and naval commander who was alive during these events, who had access to official records and eyewitness testimonies. According to Pliny's account, which he recorded in his Natural History, Messalina claimed victory after 25 encounters, 25 different men in a single day, as a competition, with spectators keeping count, with betting pools on the outcome. The Empress of Rome, third wife of the emperor, mother of the heir to the throne, competing in a prostitution endurance contest against a professional and celebrating when she won. Let that sink in for a moment. This actually happened in the imperial palace at the center of Western civilization's most powerful empire. They constructed special architectural features within palace sections specifically for these spectacles. Wealthy Romans attended like they were watching gladiatorial games at the Colosseum, except instead of trained fighters battling for survival, they watched senators' wives being systematically humiliated for entertainment value. These events became social occasions where elite Romans gathered, drank expensive wine, ate delicacies, and bonded over witnessing the degradation of their own class. Plaster fragments recovered from Palatine Hill excavations show decorative paintings that adorned these viewing rooms. Betting tokens have been discovered that spectators used to wager on competition outcomes. The physical archaeological evidence confirms what the written historical sources described, something that genuinely shocked me during my research. Messalina deployed these women as sophisticated diplomatic tools in Rome's international relations. This wasn't just about sexual gratification or even just about humiliation. This was about power, leverage, and control over foreign officials. When foreign kings or provincial governors visited Rome for diplomatic negotiations, they received access to high-ranking Roman women as demonstrations of imperial favor and hospitality. But it wasn't merely generosity, it was entrapment. Messalina's administrators documented everything meticulously: who the client was, which woman he accessed, dates, times, specific activities. These records were compiled into comprehensive files that could later be deployed for political leverage whenever imperial interests required it. Once a foreign official had intimate relations with a senator's wife under imperial arrangement, Messalina possessed blackmail material that could be activated at any moment. The implicit message transmitted was absolutely clear: Rome now owns you. Your actions can be revealed whenever it serves our purposes. Your reputation, your political position, your family's honor, all of it depends on your continued cooperation with imperial demands. This system metastasized throughout the empire like a disease, spreading from the infected heart to the extremities. Provincial governors observed operations in Rome during their visits to the capital. They saw how effectively these mechanisms worked to control people, generate revenue, and consolidate power. And they replicated the model in their own territories. Forced prostitution networks began appearing in provincial capitals across the Mediterranean world. From Britannia in the north to Syria in the east, from Hispania in the west to Egypt in the south. What began as one woman's criminal enterprise in one palace became embedded in how Roman administration functioned across multiple continents. Archaeological evidence from provincial government buildings shows architectural modifications similar to those found in Rome's imperial palace. Hidden passages, specialized rooms holding chambers, the physical infrastructure of exploitation spreading like roots from a poisonous tree. This wasn't isolated criminal behavior by one aberrant individual. This became standard operating procedure for Roman governance during the period of Messalina's influence. What renders this historical episode particularly devastating isn't merely the physical exploitation, horrific as that was. It's how systematically Messalina destroyed these women's identities, their futures, their families' futures for generations. Consider the trajectory of destruction. You're a respected Roman matron on Monday morning, hosting philosophical discussions in your garden, managing agricultural estates that feed hundreds of people, advising your husband on political strategy. By Monday evening, you've been transformed into palace property, serving clients under imperial mandate. Your marriage becomes irreparably damaged. Roman law and social custom made it virtually impossible for husbands to maintain honor when their wives had worked as prostitutes, even under direct imperial coercion that gave them no choice whatsoever. The shame was considered contaminating and permanent regardless of circumstances. Many marriages dissolved immediately when wives returned home. Others continued as hollow shells where couples could barely look at each other, where intimacy became impossible because of what stood between them. Numerous women never psychologically recovered from the trauma. Some chose suicide after their service period officially ended rather than face continued existence with destroyed reputations. They'd walk into the Tiber River with stones in their robes or drink poison imported from the east. Others became complete recluses, shutting themselves in their family villas and refusing to appear in any public space where they might encounter clients or witnesses to their humiliation. They lived as ghosts in their own homes, waiting for death to release them. And the children. Roman society considered shame hereditary, a stain in the bloodline that passed from mother to offspring. Kids grew up marked by what happened to their mothers through no fault of their own. Marriage prospects vanished because no respectable family wanted bloodline connections to former prostitutes. Political opportunities disappeared because public office required unblemished family honor extending back generations. Military commissions got denied. Business partnerships fell through. Social invitations stopped arriving. Messalina didn't just exploit individual women. She systematically broke entire family lineages across multiple generations. Families that had held power since the Republic, that had produced consuls and generals, that owned vast estates and commanded respect throughout the empire, found themselves socially destroyed. Children who should have become senators, military commanders, and provincial governors instead lived in obscurity, unable to escape the shadow of maternal exploitation that they had no role in causing. The ripple effects extended through Roman society for decades after Messalina's death. Even when people didn't know the specific details, they knew certain families had been touched by the palace. That phrase alone was enough to close doors that should have opened based on wealth and lineage. You're probably wondering at this point how she possibly maintained this massive criminal operation for 7 years without facing consequences. How did an emperor not notice his wife running a sophisticated exploitation network from his own palace? Because the prostitution system was merely one component of a far more comprehensive shadow government based on blackmail, strategic murder, and psychological manipulation. So sophisticated it would impress modern intelligence agencies. Let me walk you through how Messalina handled resistance and threats, because she didn't simply accept no as an answer from anyone. She eliminated people who refused her demands or threatened her operations, and she did it in ways that made others responsible for carrying out the executions while keeping her own hands clean. Consider the case of her stepfather, Appius Silanus. He was a respected Roman politician who'd been appointed governor of Hispania. He married Messalina's mother, making him her stepfather through this second marriage. He fulfilled his administrative duties competently, managed the province well, had no political enemies. Everything appeared completely fine. Then Messalina decided she wanted him sexually for herself. When he rejected her advances, because she was his stepdaughter and the empress, because the situation was obviously wrong on multiple levels, she orchestrated his murder. But not through obvious assassination. She created an elaborate psychological operation that made Emperor Claudius personally order the execution, while believing he was protecting himself from a genuine threat. Here's how it worked. Messalina approached Claudius early one morning with a troubled expression, claiming she'd experienced a terrible nightmare during the night. In this dream, she'd witnessed Appius Silanus entering Claudius's bedroom chamber and murdering the emperor with a dagger. She was clearly shaken by the prophetic vision. Then, as if by incredible coincidence, Narcissus arrived. He was Claudius's most trusted freedman secretary, one of the most powerful men in the empire despite his former slave status. Narcissus reported with apparent great concern that he'd experienced the exact same prophetic dream the same night, witnessing Silanus murdering the emperor. Claudius was deeply, genuinely superstitious about omens, prophetic dreams, and divine warnings. This was a well-documented personality trait that everyone close to him understood. When two people independently reported identical prophetic dreams warning of the same threat, he interpreted it as divine intervention protecting him from danger. When Appius Silanus arrived for his regular morning meeting the following day, completely unaware of anything wrong, Claudius interpreted his very appearance as confirmation of the prophecy. He ordered immediate execution without trial or investigation. Silanus barely had time to register confusion before guards seized him and carried out the death sentence. A man was killed based entirely on fabricated dreams, without evidence or due process. The psychological manipulation was absolutely flawless. Messalina identified her target, analyzed the emperor's vulnerabilities, recruited a co-conspirator who had his own reasons for compliance, and executed a murder while making the victim's death appear justified to the person ordering it. But elimination wasn't merely about removing threats to her operations. Every execution came with substantial financial benefits. Roman law dictated that when someone got convicted of treason, their property became forfeit to the state and available for redistribution. And guess who typically received those confiscated assets? The imperial household, meaning Messalina. Valerius Asiaticus was one of Rome's wealthiest men, owner of the famous gardens of Lucullus. These gardens were some of the most spectacular real estate in the entire empire. Magnificent landscaping, rare plants imported from across the world, architectural masterpieces, fountains, sculptures. Messalina wanted that property for herself. So she arranged for Asiaticus to be tried for treason, but not in a public court where he might mount an effective defense. The trial occurred in Claudius's private bedroom while Messalina watched and listened from an adjacent room behind a curtain, able to signal her allies if the proceedings weren't going according to plan. The trial was a complete farce from beginning to end. Predetermined outcome, manufactured evidence, intimidated witnesses who'd been threatened or bribed. Asiaticus was an intelligent, articulate man who nearly secured acquittal through his passionate defense and appeals to his lifetime of service to Rome. But the proceedings got sabotaged at crucial moments until finally the desired verdict came through. Asiaticus was executed, his vast properties were confiscated, and Messalina walked away with the spectacular gardens of Lucullus as her personal estate. She literally stole them through judicial murder. Here's what struck me most powerfully during months of researching this period. This entire operation was profitable as a business enterprise. This wasn't just about power or sexual gratification or psychological domination. This was about money. The forced prostitution network generated substantial direct revenue from clients paying for access. Property confiscations from executed traders brought enormous wealth in real estate, agricultural land, businesses, and liquid assets. Political blackmail created ongoing income streams as people paid protection money to avoid being targeted or to keep their secrets buried. Diplomatic manipulation generated payments from foreign officials seeking favorable treatment. Messalina essentially transformed the Roman imperial system into a criminal enterprise disguised as legitimate government operations. And she did it so skillfully that it ran profitably for 7 years. 7 years. Almost a decade of systematic exploitation, murder, blackmail, and theft conducted from inside the imperial palace, while Emperor Claudius apparently noticed nothing unusual. How is that even possible? How does an emperor remain that oblivious to massive criminal operations happening in his own household? Part of the answer lies in Claudius's personal characteristics and vulnerabilities. Historical sources consistently describe him as physically awkward from what was probably cerebral palsy or a similar condition. He was partially deaf. He suffered from various chronic illnesses. He was absent-minded and prone to being manipulated by whoever controlled his immediate environment. The Roman aristocracy had considered him unfit for power his entire life, which is why he'd been passed over for imperial succession repeatedly, until Caligula's assassination left no other options. Claudius spent enormous amounts of time focused on administrative minutiae, harbor construction projects, aqueduct engineering, grain supply logistics, and writing lengthy histories of the Etruscans and Carthaginians. He was genuinely intelligent and capable in these areas, but he delegated social management and household affairs to Messalina and his powerful freedmen secretaries, trusting them to handle what he considered less important matters. But more importantly than Claudius's weaknesses, Messalina was extraordinarily skilled at compartmentalization and manipulation. She maintained completely separate spheres of operation that never overlapped in ways Claudius could observe. Official imperial business happened in public spaces with appropriate ceremony, decorum, and witnesses. She played the role of devoted wife and empress perfectly in these contexts. Her criminal network operated in entirely different palace sections, at carefully selected times, with completely separate personnel who'd been threatened into silence. She ensured Claudius never encountered victims or heard complaints. Anyone who tried to warn the emperor about what was happening mysteriously died in apparent accidents, or got publicly discredited with scandals before they could reach him. She controlled information flow so completely that Claudius lived in a bubble of carefully constructed reality. What truly haunts me about this historical episode isn't merely the crimes themselves, horrific and extensive as they were. It's how Messalina made systematic dehumanization seem normal, even fashionable, even admirable. She employed all the right language and cultural framing to make atrocities sound like legitimate imperial policy. Women weren't being forced into prostitution against their will. They were being honored with opportunities for imperial service. Families weren't being blackmailed and exploited. They were demonstrating loyalty to Rome and supporting imperial stability. Executions weren't political murders motivated by greed. They were necessary security actions protecting the emperor from genuine threats. The linguistic manipulation she employed was masterful. Children growing up in this environment internalized these frameworks as normal reality. Teenage girls learned that their bodies ultimately belonged to the state and could be claimed for imperial service. At any moment, their families needed to demonstrate loyalty. Boys learned that their future wives might receive such summons, and that accepting it gracefully was the mark of a good Roman citizen. And elite families learned that enthusiastic compliance brought tangible rewards, while resistance meant complete destruction. The incentive structure made cooperation rational regardless of moral considerations. Families who demonstrated enthusiasm for Messalina's demands received lucrative government contracts for their businesses. Their sons got prestigious military commissions. Their husbands received favorable committee assignments in the Senate. They gained access to imperial social events where the real power negotiations happened. Compliance paid extremely well. Resistance meant annihilation. Families who refused summons or complained about treatment found themselves accused of treason within weeks. Their properties got confiscated. Their male members faced execution or permanent exile. Their female members got forced into the very system they tried to avoid, but under worse conditions as punishment for initial resistance. The consequences were so severe that compliance became the only viable survival strategy for any rational person. The truly disturbing element that keeps me awake at night when I think about this period. The system spread far beyond Rome itself like a contagious disease. Provincial governors throughout the empire observed how effectively these mechanisms worked during their mandatory visits to the capital. They saw how exploitation could generate revenue, consolidate power, control dissent, and operate with complete impunity when properly managed. And they brought the model home. They implemented similar networks in their provincial territories. Archaeological and documentary evidence shows forced prostitution systems appearing in government buildings across the empire, from Londinium in Britannia to Antioch in Syria, from Tarraco in Hispania to Alexandria in Egypt. Entire sections of provincial administrative centers were architecturally modified to accommodate these activities. Hidden passages got constructed, specialized rooms got designed, security protocols got established. The physical infrastructure of systematic exploitation spreading like roots from a poison tree. This wasn't isolated criminal behavior by one aberrant individual acting alone. This became embedded in how Roman imperial administration functioned during the mid-1st century AD. It became part of the system. Imagine being a foreign diplomat arriving in provincial capital for trade negotiations and being casually informed, "Oh, and here's where you can access local senators' wives and magistrates' daughters as part of our diplomatic hospitality services." That was the Roman Empire under Messalina's influence. Sexual exploitation packaged as luxury amenities for the political and commercial class. This sounds like fiction, like exaggerated propaganda from political enemies trying to destroy someone's reputation posthumously. But it's all documented in official Roman records from multiple independent sources that corroborate each other. Historians who lived through these events, who had direct access to imperial archives, who interviewed survivors and eyewitnesses, all confirmed these operations in remarkably consistent detail across different accounts written for different purposes. Tacitus, one of Rome's greatest historians, documented this period in his annals. Suetonius covered it in his Lives of the Caesars. Dio Cassius wrote about it centuries later based on earlier sources. Pliny the Elder, who was personally alive during Messalina's time and served in official capacities, recorded specific incidents. These weren't sensationalist tabloid writers. These were serious historians and officials, creating permanent records for future generations. What do you make of something like this becoming completely normalized and systematized in one of history's most sophisticated civilizations? How do institutional systems become so corrupted that atrocities transform into standard operating procedures that multiple people implement without apparent moral conflict? We know all these details with such precision because Romans were absolutely obsessive record keepers about everything. Palace administrators documented all activities with bureaucratic thoroughness that modern governments would recognize. Client schedules showing who had appointments at what times. Revenue reports tracking income from various sources with accounting notation. Victim profiles containing detailed personal information, physical descriptions, family connections, compliance history. Medical examination, results performed by palace physicians. Security reports about potential problems or resistance. Correspondence between officials discussing operational procedures. These aren't rumors passed down through oral tradition or politically motivated propaganda created decades after events. These are official imperial documents created in real time for administrative purposes that somehow survived for 2,000 years through wars, fires, regime changes, and deliberate attempts to destroy them. The Vatican's secret archives, which were the papal archives of documents accumulated over centuries, preserve fragments of financial records from this period showing revenue flows that only make sense when you understand what activities were generating the income. The Capitoline museums in Rome house correspondence and administrative documents showing how the system operated on a day-to-day basis. The mundane bureaucratic details that reveal how normalized it all became. Archaeological excavations of the Palatine Palace have uncovered physical modifications to room structures and corridor layouts specifically designed to support this network. Hidden passages that allowed discrete movement. Specialized chambers whose architectural features only make sense when you understand what activities occurred there. Security modifications showing controlled access points. Recent forensic analysis of imperial letters using modern linguistic techniques and forensic document examination has revealed sophisticated coded language officials used to arrange these activities while maintaining plausible deniability if correspondence got intercepted by the wrong people. They referred to women as assets or inventory in documents. They discussed service scheduling and client satisfaction metrics. They tracked acquisition costs and revenue generation per asset. They used business terminology for human trafficking. The bureaucratic language is absolutely chilling when you remember they're discussing real human beings with families and children and dreams that were all destroyed. Historians and archaeologists continue discovering new evidence about how widespread this operation truly was. Current scholarly estimates based on fragmentary records suggest hundreds of Roman families were directly affected by having female members forced into this system. Thousands more lived in constant anxiety about potential selection, modifying their behavior and decisions based on fear of attracting the wrong attention. And we're almost certainly only seeing a small fraction of the full picture. Most victims never spoke about their experiences due to overwhelming shame and fear. Most operational records were deliberately destroyed after Messalina's death, as officials scrambled to erase evidence of their complicity and participation. What survived is probably just the tip of a much larger iceberg of systematic abuse. So how did this nightmare finally end? How did Messalina's empire of exploitation finally come crashing down? The answer reveals both her excessive ambition and her fundamental miscalculation of where absolute boundaries still existed, even in imperial Rome. In October of 48 AD, while Emperor Claudius was away from Rome inspecting harbor construction projects at Ostia, Messalina made the decision that would destroy everything she'd built. She decided to marry her lover Gaius Silius in a full public ceremony, not a secret affair conducted in private, not an informal arrangement hidden from public view. A complete legal Roman wedding with all the traditional formalities, religious rites, witnesses, contracts, and public celebration. This constituted bigamy since she was still legally married to Claudius. It constituted treason since she was effectively transferring her imperial status to another man. It constituted an implied coup attempt, since Silius would presumably become emperor if this marriage was recognized. And it was probably the single stupidest political move in all of Roman history. Why did she do this? Historians have debated her motivations for 2,000 years without reaching consensus. Some scholars suggest she genuinely loved Silius and wanted legitimate marriage rather than just being his mistress. Others argue she was actively planning a coup to overthrow Claudius and place Silius on the throne with herself as the power behind him. Some think she'd become so accustomed to operating without consequences for so long that she'd completely lost any sense of danger or boundaries. Whatever her reasoning, it was catastrophically terrible judgment. The wedding party became a massive celebration, showcasing everything she'd built over 7 years of operations. All of Messalina's usual victims were forced to attend and serve as entertainment for the wedding guests. They served wine, performed degrading acts on demand, demonstrated their complete subjugation while wedding attendees laughed and celebrated and treated it all as enormous fun. Making everything public was her fatal error. Too many people witnessed the ceremony. Too many senators and officials realized what was happening and understood the implications. The information couldn't be contained or controlled through her usual methods. When news reached Claudius at Ostia, even he couldn't ignore reality anymore. His powerful freedmen secretaries, Narcissus, Pallas, and Callistus, the men who'd helped Messalina operate with impunity for years, suddenly recognized that their own positions and lives were now threatened. If Messalina successfully placed Silius on the throne in a coup, they'd all be eliminated to prevent them from revealing what they knew. So they finally told Claudius everything, not just about the wedding, but about the entire criminal enterprise she'd been running for 7 years right under his oblivious nose. Claudius initially refused to believe them. Messalina had conditioned him for years to dismiss any accusations against her as politically motivated lies from jealous enemies. But the evidence was overwhelming this time. Too many witnesses confirming the wedding ceremony, too much documentation of her other activities that the freedmen had quietly compiled as insurance. Too many senators and officials willing to testify once they saw an opportunity to bring her down without facing retaliation. The freedmen understood this was their only opportunity to remove Messalina before she destroyed them. They kept Claudius isolated from her messengers and prevented her from reaching him to explain or manipulate him, as she'd done so many times before. Messalina's advisors realized she was finished. Narcissus, who'd probably been the most complicit in enabling her operations, sent guards to execute her immediately before she could mount any defense or countermove. The execution occurred in the gardens of Lucullus, the same spectacular property she'd stolen years earlier by orchestrating Valerius Asiaticus's judicial murder. There's grim poetic justice in that location. She died surrounded by the beauty she'd killed to possess. Her final moments, Historical accounts describe her begging desperately for mercy, trying to negotiate, offering anything and everything to survive just a little longer. No dignity, no stoic acceptance, no acknowledgement of responsibility for anything she'd done. Just desperate pleading from someone who'd spent years destroying other people's dignity and now faced her own destruction. She attempted to claim she'd been manipulated by Silius, that everything was his fault, that he'd somehow controlled and forced her, that she remained a completely loyal and devoted wife to Claudius, and this was all a terrible misunderstanding that could be explained if she just had the chance. The guards weren't interested in her excuses or explanations or manipulations. They'd received clear orders. She died by the sword in those gardens while trying to negotiate her way out until the very last second. She was approximately 28 years old. The Senate immediately voted for damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory, the ultimate Roman punishment. Her name got chiseled from every inscription. Her statues got smashed to dust. Her image got melted down from coins. Every official mention of her got erased from public records. They wanted her forgotten, eliminated from history as if she'd never existed at all. But you can't truly erase truth, especially when it's documented in multiple independent sources. The records survived in various archives. The victims and their families remembered. The historians who'd witnessed everything recorded it for future generations. And 2,000 years later, we still study what happened. Here's what truly resonates about Messalina's story beyond the shocking details that grab attention. This isn't merely about one exceptionally evil person committing terrible crimes. This is about how quickly systematic dehumanization becomes normalized when the right person gains sufficient power combined with weak institutional checks and balances. The bureaucracy that made exploitation efficient and scalable. The language manipulation that made atrocities sound like legitimate policy. The economic incentives that made cooperation rational for self-interested actors. The generational trauma that extended consequences across decades to people who weren't even born when the crimes occurred. These patterns appear repeatedly throughout human history. Whenever institutions gain absolute control over people's lives without meaningful accountability mechanisms. The psychological mechanisms Messalina exploited remain disturbingly relevant today in different contexts. The power of shame to control behavior and silence victims. The effectiveness of sexual humiliation as a weapon of political control. The way systematic abuse gets normalized through gradual implementation and appropriate cultural packaging. Understanding how this worked in ancient Rome helps us recognize similar patterns in contemporary situations, even though the specific forms have changed. But most importantly, we must remember the thousands of individual women whose names and personal stories have been completely lost to history. Real people who suffered unimaginable trauma to build one person's empire of absolute power. Women who did absolutely nothing wrong, except be born into the wrong families at the wrong moment in history. Mothers who watched their daughters inherit their shame through no fault of their own. Children who grew up knowing their family names had been permanently stained. Their experiences matter profoundly. Their pain was real and deserves acknowledgement. And their stories deserve to be remembered and told even 2,000 years later, not for shock value or entertainment, but as testimony to what human beings can endure and as warning about what becomes possible when power operates without restraint. After Messalina's execution, Claudius briefly declared he would never remarry, that he was done with wives who destroyed everything. That resolution lasted approximately 1 year before his freedmen convinced him to marry his niece Agrippina the Younger, who eventually murdered him with poisoned mushrooms to place her son Nero on the throne. But that's an entirely different story of Roman imperial dysfunction for another time. The Senate's attempt to erase Messalina from history through damnatio memoriae failed in its ultimate purpose. They destroyed the physical representations, but they couldn't eliminate the truth from historical memory, because too many people had documented what happened in too many different sources. Understanding this history matters because it illuminates uncomfortable truths about how even sophisticated civilizations function. Rome is celebrated for revolutionary contributions to law, engineering, architecture, philosophy, governance, literature. It was simultaneously a society that normalized slavery, gladiatorial death matches, and apparently systematic sexual exploitation by imperial authorities. Sophisticated civilization and profound institutionalized cruelty coexisted in the same society. That paradox should make us think carefully about our own societies and what horrors might be operating beneath respectable surfaces while we focus on our accomplishments. Could something like this happen again in different forms? I believe the answer is unquestionably yes, because the underlying dynamics haven't fundamentally changed. Power still corrupts when unchecked. Institutions still fail when accountability mechanisms weaken. People still find ways to rationalize cruelty when it benefits them personally or advances causes they support. The specific mechanisms might differ, but the fundamental patterns of exploitation remain disturbingly constant across human history in different contexts. That's why studying even the darkest chapters of history serves vital purposes, not for entertainment value or shock appeal, but for understanding, for recognizing warning signs before they escalate, for strengthening our commitment to accountability and human dignity, for remembering that victims deserve to have their suffering acknowledged rather than erased because it's uncomfortable. The women Messalina exploited never received justice. Many died without anyone officially acknowledging what had been done to them. Their families lived with inherited shame for generations after. But by studying and remembering what happened with historical rigor, we honor their experiences and recommit ourselves to building societies where such systematic dehumanization becomes genuinely impossible rather than merely hidden from view. What mechanisms exist in our current societies to prevent similar abuses of power? What warning signs should we be watching for? How do we build institutional accountability that actually functions when tested by individuals willing to exploit every weakness? And most importantly, how do we ensure that victims of systematic abuse get heard, believed, supported, and vindicated rather than silenced and blamed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about your perspectives on these questions. This channel exists to explore authentic history in all its complexity, beautiful and terrible, inspiring and horrifying. If you found this educational exploration valuable, please subscribe to support more content examining historical truths that often get overlooked or sanitized in popular presentations. Where are you watching from right now? What other dark historical episodes would you like to see explored with this same commitment to factual accuracy based on primary sources and thorough research? Your input directly shapes future content on this channel. Remember, history isn't just dates and battles and the names of kings. It's millions of individual human experiences, many of them involving profound suffering that deserves to be acknowledged rather than forgotten. By studying even the most uncomfortable chapters with intellectual honesty, we honor those who endured and commit ourselves to building better futures informed by understanding the past. Thank you for engaging with this difficult but profoundly important historical material. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep remembering that behind every historical event were real people whose experiences mattered then and matter now.